Welcome to Catholic Answers Live, the program where you participate with your questions about apologetics and evangelization, including the most important theological, spiritual, moral, and social issues facing the world today. Call now with your question for today's guest. Toll free, 1-888-31-TRUTH. That's 888-318-7884. Now, from San Diego, Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back. Hour number 2 is upon us. Welcome back. This is Catholic Answers Live. Patrick Coffin here. Delighted to be joined by someone I've interviewed many times from my home and native land. That would be the Canadian superstar, Stephanie Gray. She is the foundress and executive director of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. She has debated abortion advocates across the country. She trains high schoolers, university people. She'll go anywhere. She has no fear of a podium and a big or small crowd. Stephanie Gray, welcome to Catholic Answers Live.
Thank you. You know, I do actually kind of fear a small crowd.
You know what?
You know, I am more comfortable in front of 5,000 than 5, just saying.
I have to pick up what you're laying down. Because 5 people, you know, they're looking at your nostril. They're critically evaluating everything. And they're afraid of each other. They're afraid to clap and laugh and stuff. So it's tough.
It's more intimidating.
But while you may have fear, you still do the right thing.
That's right.
And that means a lot.
Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's a will to do what's right in spite of your fear.
I said that. Did you know that?
I think Mark Twain said it.
No, Mark Twain. Well, let's segue to your forte, which is explaining the pro-life view and often using Socratic and clever ways to get the other person to connect those dots so that you can enjoy that delicious aha moment when the eureka dots are connected. Unmaskingchoice.ca is the website. Stephanie's been on before, and it's always generated great interest in callers and great feedback. So let's talk a little bit at the first about Kermit Gosnell and that trial.
Yes, I was at the closing arguments.
You were?
Yes.
Well, because I think from a media public understanding point of view, that was a watershed. 50 years from now, we're going to look back at that trial, God willing, as the catalyst for change in favor of the pro-life movement, because we now know that his house of horrors there in Philadelphia is not an exception.
Right. And, you know, that's why my colleague Jonathan Van Maren and I went. He approached me. He said, Stephanie, now that we're in Toronto, it's a, 8-hour drive. This is history in the making. This is the beginning of the end. You know, we need to go and we need to see, an abortionist who kills children on trial. We haven't seen that. We need to see him on trial. And I think this is not isolated. We're hearing of other cases. And regardless of how clean or unclean a clinic is, we know in all of the clinics, little tiny defenseless children who don't even have vocal cords with which to scream are being dismembered, decapitated, and disemboweled. That needs to be exposed.
What do you say to people listening right now who are pro-life, who don't like the words disemboweled, killing baby? They don't like graphic images. They want the whole issue to be as domesticated and niceified as possible, to which you say what?
I would say, why don't you like it? And inevitably, we typically don't like it because it's disturbing. We don't want to think about such a negative thing, and all of that is understandable. But then we have to ask ourselves, is it the truth? Because people will be repulsed by that which is repulsive. And currently, abortion in our culture has not been portrayed as a repulsive thing. It's been portrayed as a very positive thing. We are naturally attracted to the beautiful and repelled by the ugly. And so if we wish to repel people of abortion, then we can't neutralize our description of it. We actually have to expose it as it really is. And so the language, of dismember actually isn't an exaggeration. It is simply the honest facts of that which needs to repulse people in order for it to end.
If you heard the first part of the first hour, Steve Ray took a call from an atheist, and Steve had originally said that many atheists are unhappy. They're sort of rebelling against something. It's a cry of the heart as much or more than an intellectual position. Do you find a fair overlap between atheists and people who are pro-abortion? Have you noticed that overlap of worldview?
Yes. I mean, I think it's possible for people to come to the conclusion that abortion is wrong from a human rights perspective, that if an atheist thinks it's wrong to kill 5-year-olds, I just need to convince the atheist that the preborn child is human like the 5-year-old, and therefore abortion will be wrong. But nonetheless, I often see this rejection of a higher power can lead to a rejection of the beings protecting the youngest of the beings made in the image of that highest power. And I was just just saying before we went to air that I gave a presentation in Colorado recently, and a student was in favor of abortion, came up afterwards, told me that he was an atheist, and you see him kind of rejecting that the goodness and the beauty of God and of his creation.
Mm-hmm. And how'd that go?
Well, it was
Drop
very
the other
interesting.
foot.
It was great because he came up and I was, in my understanding, giving a presentation to a pro-life audience, equipping them how to talk to people who weren't pro-life. And there was one mole in the room. So when he came up at the end, I was kind of surprised that he was in favor of abortion. I didn't think that he was part of the pro-life club, but I thought that's fine. He heard the message. And as we got talking, I realized his real issue was theism and atheism and not so much abortion. So I asked a clarification question, being Socratic. I said, so you said you were a Catholic, but now you're an atheist. And he said, yes. And I said, well, for you to choose atheism over Catholicism, you must have found atheism more compelling. So what was it that was more compelling? And
sound of crickets.
The sound of silence. He just went, just stared at me and blinked his eyes rapidly. And I said, no, really. I go to a party. Someone says, you want wine? I say, sure. They say red or white. And I said to him, I choose red. Why? Because I prefer red over white. It wouldn't make sense to say white. So you've made a choice. You prefer atheism over Catholicism. Why? And again, no answer.
Yeah. Was it the luminous quality of God's non-existence? Yeah. Very good. Well, we've got a first break looming, but you can take one call with your permission. I want to go for one first. It's Joanne in Mesa, Arizona, listening on Immaculate Heart Radio. Joanne, you're on Catholic Answers Live with Stephanie Gray. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for taking my call. I was wondering, with so many abortions being done in our country and over the world, do people really think about the future on all the people that they've killed who are going to support the people that are performing the abortions when they get older? I mean, and we're killing off scientists and doctors and who knows who.
Right, Joanne. And ordinary people and Down syndrome people and people who will make no quantifiable societal help. But the demographic question is something it looms large in the background, the kind of population rate that we'll have if we continue the rate of abortion and contraception.
Right, absolutely. It's interesting. I remember when I first started dialoguing about abortion when I was a teenager, people would say, well, there's overpopulation. Well, now we have the opposite problem. We have underpopulation. And, being two Canadians on air, I always say, well, come to Canada. There's lots of room there.
Plenty of farm storage area.
Yes. Right. But we see that if it weren't, for example, in our home country of Canada, if it weren't for immigration, we would be in trouble numbers-wise because we're not having enough young people born to replace the old people. Same thing is happening in Europe. There are some governments that are providing financial incentives for people to have children. Russia is facing a serious problem of not enough children in a country where you have individual women who will have 8, 9, and 10 abortions each.
Right.
So, yes, we are going to be reaping what we're sowing, but in this case, we haven't sown children, and therefore we're going to be creating a significant problem. And I think, yes, she raises another point. We're killing off, people. We often complain, well, where's the cure for cancer? Where's the cure for AIDS? We may have killed the very people who would have contributed that. The one caveat I make to that point that pro-lifers need to bear in mind is what will the abortion advocates say back? And they may say, well, we could have also aborted the next Hitler. If you could have aborted Hitler, wouldn't you have aborted Hitler? And I say, well, no, wait a minute. You're creating a false dilemma. It's either Hitler kills all the Jews or 6 million Jews and 5 million others, or we abort him. A third option is if I had the power to go back in history, I would have raised him differently. So that I wouldn't have killed an innocent child in the case of aborting him, but nor would I have raised him such that he would have risen to the power he did to harm the millions of people that he did.
Do you take a little bit of comfort in the fact that faithful Catholics have more kids and therefore the future, in a way, will keep belonging to us?
Well, yes. I mean, there certainly is that aspect, is which movement, the pro-life or the pro-abortion movement, is creating the next generation of activists, and certainly pro-lifers are.
We're going to take a break. We'll come back. The balance of the show is you speaking with Stephanie Gray, our guest this hour. We're taking calls from both pro-lifers and people who believe in the pro-choice rhetoric. If you support Roe v. Wade and you think the growing baby in the womb is just products of conception, we want to hear why that is. If you're looking for pro-life strategy, maybe you've run into a pro-choice coworker or family member and you're looking for some intellectual ammo. Stephanie Gray is the executive director of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. The website is unmaskingchoice.ca, unmaskingchoice.ca. Go there. You won't be sorry. It's 12 after the hour. I'm Patrick Coffin. This is Catholic Answers Live. Touching that dial is strictly prohibited. Jesus said, I have come that they might have life and life in abundance, John 10, verses 10. We're all about life here, natural and supernatural on Catholic Answers Live. We're talking about the abortion scourge, how to cure the world of abortion, one heart and mind at a time. Our guest is Stephanie Gray of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. That website is unmaskingchoice.ca. The phone number to reach her today is toll-free, 1-888-318-7884. Let's go to Berkeley, California, listening on our favorite website, Catholic.com. Michael, welcome to the show. You're on the air with Stephanie Gray.
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you for talking to me today.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for calling.
So I was wondering if you can answer a question for me that isn't too directly related to the pro-life issue.
Okay.
So I was wondering, can you elucidate upon the stance that the Catholic Church has on in vitro fertilization, and are there any supporting evidence in the Bible that further argues for our stance on how in vitro fertilization is wrong?
Okay, great question. In terms of IVF, generally speaking, if you look at this church's teachings on matters of sexuality, it teaches that sex has two purposes, babies and bonding. And so the problem with in vitro fertilization is it creates babies without bonding because the child is created in a lab, in contrast to contraception, in which you'd have bonding, although that could be debated, without babies. And so sex is to be a procreative and a unitive act, and life should flow from that life-giving act. And so with in vitro fertilization, you don't have the act. You are just basically taking the parts and then creating a human, almost like in an assembly line, turning a human into something which is made rather than begotten. And we humans should be begotten rather than made. And in the case of IVF, it goes beyond not only violating the nature of the beauty of the sexual act and how life is to become about, but it also involves creating multiple human beings and then destroying some, freezing some, perhaps donating to science some. So you have one child or two children that will come to term, but how many of their siblings have been killed in order to bring them to term? So there's those problems as well. And with regards to, where in the scriptures does it talk about this? I think what we need to remember is where in the scriptures does it say the scriptures alone? In fact, we have to use an authority beyond the scriptures to even come to the scriptures, to know that the Bible is God's inspired word. So the church teaches that we are to use tradition as well as the scriptures, and therefore we can look beyond the scriptures to have a moral authority on what to do on matters of sexuality, particularly with regards to IVF.
Did it help, Michael?
Yeah.
You might want to follow up. Obviously, in live radio, with only an hour, we can only do so much. But Dr. John Haas has an essay you can find at the USCCB website. It's called Begotten Not Made, A Catholic View of Reproductive Technology. And he goes through a brief history of church teaching on it, why IVF, that's, by the way, in vitro fertilization, is wrong. And he connects it to cloning and to the other moral interventions involved in contraception. Dr. John, it's HAAS.
Yes, and just related to that, Dr. John Haas works with the National Catholic Bioethics Center in Philadelphia, which has a lot of fantastic and apologetic on all of these topics. So reading that paper at the USCCB site and then going to the National Catholic Bioethics Center will give you a wealth of resources to explain more than we can in a few minutes.
Gotcha. Mike in Berkeley. Yes, that Berkeley. Thanks for the call. Let's go to Greg in Chicago, Illinois on Sirius 130. Hello, Greg.
Hello. Thanks for taking my call. I've been contemplating a lot about what's a good macro strategy, and I think everyone kind of realizes we have to have conversion and reversion of existing Catholics to really fully understand what the Catholic teaching is. But the other part of it is part of like what the guys now taste brought about and public perception and information. My question is there like an abortionist handbook or something like that describes the procedure that could be shared or publicized that this is what the actual it's this medical procedure. Well, here is the medical procedure. person who doesn't understand what abortion is doing to a child, especially after 20 weeks, they can feel.
Right.
Does that exist? And, obviously we're not going to win the abortion. We've got to take these measured steps. So win the hearts and minds, get Catholics to actually follow their Catholic faith, and then get the public perception out there and the facts. So does that exist? I mean, does that make sense?
Certainly, yeah. We have to, my dad would always tell me, your Scottish grandfather always said, use their own words against them. And absolutely, I think it's very important that we go to the medical textbooks and the literature describing how to do abortions, use the very language that they're telling us, those who do abortions are telling us to describe the procedure, and then communicate that to the public, because people will see just how gruesome a procedure this is, how they talk about limbs and reshaping the form and the body of the baby to know that they got all the parts out. This is in the literature. We need to expose this for people to realize. So yes, if you go online, you can even order it on Amazon, Abortion Practice. It's a medical textbook written by late-term abortionist Dr. Warren Hearn. So I'm looking at, Amazon right now. You can order that book. Also, the National Abortion Federation has information, a textbook online. They have several chapters. A Clinician's Guide to Medical and Surgical Abortion is something that you can use. And when I've debated abortionists, I've quoted from these texts to expose to my audience exactly what the physicians I'm debating are up to and what they're doing. So the NAF website and Abortion Practice by Warren Hearn would certainly be two great starting points for you.
Does that help, Greg?
Absolutely. Thank you, and God bless you all.
All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. This is Catholic Answers Live, 20 after the hour. Now going to Rob in New York, on WMTQ Radio. Hello, Rob.
Hey, good evening, guys. How are you?
Good.
I'm calling. I'm actually. I'm in college right now, and I'm actually not a Catholic, but I've been working with the pro-life Catholic group, and it's actually started to bring me more and more, into becoming Catholic, where, I'm speaking with a priest about, entering the church. So it's actually been a vehicle for me and my spiritual journey. But one question that I've had, and I guess it's sort of bugging me, is, the Catholics, my Catholic friends, they're all very pro-life. And campus, we have a very good chaplain, very faithful to the teachings of the church. But then I hear about these stories, we have Catholic politicians.
Scott, excuse me, Rob, I'm sure there's a question lurking here. I want to get a good answer for you. So what's the question for Stephanie?
So the question is, how should somebody who, is looking, who is pro-life, who agrees with the Catholic Church on its theological teachings, sort of come to terms with the fact that you have, cardinals, and even at the papal inauguration mass, you have these people who are claiming to be Catholic, but support, pro-death policies, receiving communion. Because I look at that and I'm just it throws me off, I guess, a little bit when I see that.
Okay, well, now we're getting somewhere. Rob, you're scratching all of us where we itch. The scandal in place when high-profile Catholic pro-choice people receive our Lord and Savior bodily in Holy Communion.
Very serious, and they should not be receiving communion. They should not be presenting themselves for communion without having gone to confession, and because this is a public sin, publicly renouncing their support for abortion. And where they are public figures who haven't done that, I would say they shouldn't be given communion if they do present themselves. And sometimes there's confusion in various reports. Were they actually given communion? Were they not? I think you can be rightly outraged if someone is given communion who is in a state of having committed this very public, serious sin and not having repented of that. We should be outraged by that. But I think it's important to remember that everyone fails. Everyone falls short. And so that the test of entering, the Catholic Church should not be, well, what has this Catholic bishop or this cardinal or this priest done? Because in all situations, you're going to find a cardinal, a priest, a bishop, all of these guys who have committed sins like me, like Patrick, like all of us. So the question is, what does the church teach? And is the church teaching truth? And if so, then we must embrace that, knowing that the church is filled with sinners.
Does that make sense, Rob?
Yeah, that makes sense, and I guess I already knew that answer. It's just sort of coming to terms with it.
Blessed Mother Teresa used to talk about the relatively dismal choice record of Christ on earth. You look at 266 popes since St. Peter, right, Rob?
Yep.
Well, we've only had a very small number of so-called bad popes we've been blessed with that we would prefer not to have been blessed with. However, Christ's choice of the apostles didn't look so good from a statistical point of view. He had 12 of all the Jewish leaders he could have picked. He picked those cowardly hicks. Only one stuck around for the crucifixion. Peter denied him. Judas betrayed him. Imagine how interested folks in the first century Palestine would have been in that new faith, founded by a failure Messiah who dies under torture. So supernatural perspective, I think, is important, Rob.
Huh.
Does that make sense?
That's a lot for me to chew on, I guess.
Well, good. We hope it's bite-sized morsels, though, Rob.
And we hope you have a Rome coming soon.
Thank you guys very much.
Hey, that's good. I can see a bumper sticker. Keep us in your prayers, and we'll do the same, Rob.
All right, God bless.
Very good. God bless you. This is Catholic Answers Live. Stephanie Gray, the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, is our guest. Pro-Life Q&A Open Forum, that's our topic. Before the break, we've got time for Scott in Dallas on KATH. Hello, Scott.
Hey, hi, Stephanie. My question is, why is it that people who do abortions, the moms, the doctors, the assistants to the doctors, and for that matter, Obama, who funds Planned Parenthood, who does abortions, why aren't they all being arrested by the police and going to jail for murder?
Great question. It's because tragically in our culture, we have denied the human personhood status of the victims of abortion. And so it's not considered a case of murder like, drowning your children in the bathtub is considered murder, when we've had incidents like that here in North America. So tragically, because society does not consider the preborn human persons, killing them isn't considered a crime. So that's why it's our job to make the case for their human personhood, which can be established clearly scientifically, backed up with basic philosophical reasoning, so that the conclusion is it is as wrong to kill the preborn as it is as wrong to kill the born, and therefore there should be consequences for the doctors who kill those children.
Do you advocate a kind of nonviolent civil disobedience? Just comparing Roe v. Wade 1973 with Dred Scott in 1865, should people who disagreed with slavery have stormed the gates and knocked down and destroyed plantations or what have you? You see the parallel.
Right.
If it's settled law, should we fall asleep on it? Should we actively fight against it?
Right. Good question. I mean, if it's, as you say, nonviolent, civil disobedience, then absolutely it's not unethical to do it, but is it strategic to do it? We look at Operation Rescue. That happened in the 90s. It certainly saved lives, but here we are, and abortion still happening. So maybe we need to do other things.
The battle versus the war.
Yes.
This is Catholic Answers Live. Pro-Life Q&A Open Forum with Stephanie Gray returns after these messages. Stick around. Lots more to come. God loves us, and there's nothing we can do about it. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. My name is Patrick Coffin. Happy to have fellow Canadians on board whenever we can. We invite them regularly, but only a few have the courage to say yes and join us. Stephanie Gray has done so from beautiful Calgary. What's the weather like up there?
Well, I don't live in Calgary anymore. Actually, Calgary tragically was hit with some severe flooding. Many of our supporters actually faced a lot of flooding in their basements, loss of homes and properties. But I moved to Toronto a few months ago, so I'm in the very humid
but you do know
East.
you born and raised, weren't you?
Born in Vancouver.
Vancouver. How
so
long
you had the East Coast, and I had the West Coast.
And now we're teaching Americans French, so when the takeover happens, they can acclimate more quickly. Very good. Muy bien. Très bien.
Bravo.
1-888-31-TRUTH. That's the toll-free phone number. Pro-Life Q&A Open Forum. Whether or not you're pro-life, doesn't matter which side of the spectrum. We'll take all comers today, including Mike in Cincinnati, Ohio, on Sacred Heart Radio. Hello, Mike. You're on the air with Stephanie Gray.
Hello, Patrick and Stephanie, and thank you for taking my call, and thank you for the work you do. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
I ask you to respond to my comment from your question early in the broadcast about why certain graphic terms that were used, why a pro-life person such as myself would object to them. And I would object to them maybe not object, but not always agree with them because they evoke certain very strong emotions from people that disagree with the pro-life position, in that the argument for the pro-life position is many times best rooted in reason rather than emotion.
Okay, Mike, let's get real specific. What graphic terms did Stephanie use that you found offensive or evoke more emotion than reason?
The graphic but very accurate terms of disembowelment and dismembering and these types of things.
Yes.
Let me ask you, if you don't mind, Mike, if I could ask you a question. What would be wrong with evoking emotion?
Because it turns the conversation into one that is not a conversation that could be more persuasive with reason when such strong emotions, when these strong emotions can put people on the defensive very quickly and make them realize the unimaginable horror that it really is. But if you can take it into a more rational-based rather than emotional-based conversation, you could be more effective.
Have you experienced that? That
Yes,
is more effective without graphics than with?
In certain situations.
Let me ask you this. Go ahead.
Not always, I'll say that.
Okay. So if you look at, for example, campaigns to get us to sponsor children in Africa, do you think those campaigns would be more effective without the images of children starving in Africa?
I don't know, but I understand your point.
Well, take a stab at it, Mike. Just a grid showing starvation rates and statistics and pie graphs versus a child with a teardrop falling down their face from starvation. Which do you think would be better able to inspire people to give to an organization that helps those children?
The emotional one.
And here's why I bring that up. I think that there are two extremes to be avoided. One is to avoid using the images, and the other is to use them poorly. And perhaps maybe what you're thinking of is language that is used or images that are used, but they're not used well. And I think images in a sense are like a gun. A gun can be used for a great thing, and it can also be used to do horrible damage, as we've seen with school shootings. So it's all in how the thing is used. It's important to remember that the culture is one in which we can't be all head or we can't be all heart. And I can understand the concern about emotion. I don't just want people to make decisions based on emotion. But what I've found in dialoguing with people is that if I stay completely in the head and the logic, because of their own emotional ties to abortion, maybe their siblings have had abortions, their girlfriends, their mothers, they're not actually open to my logic because of the emotional wall. And so we have to find a balance between the head and the heart, and pictures accompanied with reason, accompanied with logic, science, and philosophy, I think is the most holistic message that we can provide, keeping in mind that pictures have worked for the civil rights movement, the abolitionist movement, the anti-child labor movement, and as we see, most currently with campaigns to get us to help kids who are starving. What do you think?
I think you've explained it very well. Thank you.
I was going to ask Stephanie a question of Stephanie, but I'll ask you, Mike. Do you think that most people in your orbit, okay, your friends, family, all the people you hang out with and interact with in Cincinnati, know what an abortion is precisely?
Yes, I do.
I mean, the methods. They know how the baby dies.
Oh, maybe not so much, no.
Well, I guess that there might be a medical accuracy value, Stephanie, to using terms that they're not trying to fuel inject the emotion. They're not trying to guilt people or use the most disgusting verbs we possibly can, but just in the interest of accuracy. This is what happens to the preborn baby.
Yes, and actually that's another good point. Even though I understand this accurate terminology can have an emotional reaction, yes, you raise a good point, is that this still is accurate terminology and that this actually still is facts. And so if we're to look simply at the facts of the abortion procedure, we have to have a intellectually honest discussion of what that is, and that involves looking at what we're talking about. Same with smoking. If I want to know, how it can affect my health, I need to see the diseased lung. I need to
watch the commercial where, like Yul Brynner, the guy who smoked his whole life and denied it, is all of a sudden, sipping water from a hole in his throat.
Right. Yes,
as compared to pie graphs, which are also accurate.
Mike, on our website, unmaskingchoice.ca, from the homepage, there's a big green button on the right that says Pro-Life Classroom. If you click on that, the last few lessons go into more detail than I can in a few minutes on why we use pictures and the role they play accompanied with rational arguments.
Mike in Cincinnati, great call. Thanks for joining us, sir. It is 35 after the hour. My name is Patrick Coffin, your host. This is Catholic Answers Live. This is a Q&A open forum with Stephanie Gray. She is the executive director of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. That website, again, I want to send more eyeballs there, is www.unmaskingchoice.ca. Let's go to beautiful Fort Myers, Florida on Ave Maria Radio. It's Amanda. Hello, Amanda. You're on the air.
Hi there, Patrick and Stephanie. Thanks so much for taking my call. My question relates to indifference, not just among Catholics, but I think among the general population. I have recently come back to the Catholic faith after, unfortunately, an experience of having a 22-week-old baby born. And I think for a lot of years, even though I practiced the Catholic faith, I didn't quite understand the pro-life stance until, unfortunately, I experienced, something that terrible. Mm-hmm. And so now with this new experience that I've had, I'm very much not indifferent. And so my question is, how can pro-lifers, Catholic and non-Catholics, be more of an advocate for the pro-life stance? I mean, I think that there are strong voices in life and in anti-life, and there's a large chunk of everyday people right in the middle who really, I hate to say it, don't seem to care as much.
Amanda, it's totally accurate. You've got pro-life people, activists, legislators, people, prayer warriors. On the other side of the spectrum, you have the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, all the attorney machine and so on. Then you've got the mushy middle. Mm-hmm. Abortion, meh. Mm-hmm. Yawn. Right, exactly. How do you overcome that apathy?
Right. Well, I think that's, helps us understand why we're warned in Revelation, be hot or cold, but lukewarm, and I'll vomit you out of my mouth. I mean, God abhors lukewarmness. And the way that we change that is we inject passion into people. We associate conviction or emotion, rather, with an experience that will instill in them conviction. And so I'm a firm believer that if we want to change the culture, we have to engage the culture. Lukewarm people will not come to us, so we need to go to them. That's why 5 days a week, my colleagues and I are outside high schools. When students over the lunch hour take a break and go have lunch somewhere, they're seeing our team with pro-life signs saying to them, what do you think about abortion? And kids who are lukewarm aren't lukewarm anymore. Kids who are pregnant and scheduled by their boyfriends to have abortions the following week tell us that they're not going to have the abortion anymore. So these are lukewarm people that are no longer lukewarm because we have presented the pro-life message to them in a way that is impossible to ignore and convinces them that abortion is a moral wrong as opposed to a woman's right. So if you, again, go to that website, unmaskingchoice.ca, and click on under strategy and training, there's a lot of resources that you can share through social media, on the About Us, our campaigns. We have different projects where we give tips for things that people can do to make people less apathetic. I mean, if you look at your own experience, having a child at 22 weeks, now, is your child okay, or did he or she pass?
Well, unfortunately, they were twins, and one of them passed, but the other one is still with us.
Okay.
And here in Florida, it's legal for women to have abortions for another 2 weeks past what my baby was born at. So,
right.
Well, there's a great living homily right there, Amanda.
Right, a very powerful story, and that's something that you can say, right? I mean, your child will obviously be smaller than other children. People say, your baby's so cute, but so tiny or whatever, and then you can talk about the age that your baby was born and how outraged you are to know that at the same time you were trying to save that child, other people were killing children. And I think what you've experienced is a strong emotional experience that gives you conviction. That's why, to my referencing my previous caller, pictures are so powerful because they give us an emotional experience that instills deep conviction. You look at world changers from King to Gandhi, any social reformer, any hero, they've experienced or seen injustice, and it kickstarts them into a whole new life because of what they've experienced. So we have to give other people that experience.
Amanda, thanks for your decision and for your call. We appreciate it very much. It's 40 minutes after the hour. One last segment with Stephanie Gray, Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. Unmaskingchoice.ca is the website. Stephanie, can you find out where you and your team go, which high schools? And is it Toronto only, or different cities?
We are out 5 days a week in Calgary as well as Toronto. However, we are training pro-lifers with pre-existing pro-life organizations to take on our projects, but in their own organization's name. So across Canada now, there are groups in the West, Central Canada, and the East that are doing these projects, and we're hoping to have more groups starting that up in the States too. So go to unmaskingchoice.ca, go to contact us under the About section of our website, and we'll send you info.
And you can pronounce about any way they want.
That's right.
All right. God love
Canadian
you.
or American.
Right. This is Catholic Answers Right On. This is Catholic Answers Live. I hope I get a chance to say the word resources at some point, or schedule, or process.
Wait, you say schedule?
I don't, in fact. My family members
I say
do.
Schedule.
Yeah, I say schedule. Potato?
Potato.
Me too. 1-888-31-TRUTH. Truth, right? Truth.
As opposed to truth?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. We'll be back. One more segment with Stephanie Gray, pro-life Q&A open forum, starting with Mike in San Antonio. We hope to get to Greg in Dallas and Joanna in California. Lots more to come on Catholic Answers Live. 888-31-TRUTH is the toll-free number. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Our guest is Stephanie Gray, not only the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, but she's on the faculty at Blackstone Legal Fellowship and is the author of A Physician's Guide to Discussing Abortion. That is a biggie. That is a big link in the pro-life chain that is rather weak.
I am firmly convinced that we would almost, and I say this, almost not need any pregnancy care centers if physicians protected preborn children. Because I think that the moment of decision is when that woman goes to her doctor, and how does that physician interact with the patient? And if he is supportive and he is going to walk with her through that pregnancy, and she's going to have the support, which then may come from pregnancy centers and so forth.
Right.
But that decision of to abort or not can be determined in that moment of doctor-patient relationship, not pregnancy counselor, volunteer, and client.
Did you write it for medical profs and everyone else?
Yes, for anyone in the medical field, but primarily I give it to medical students who I train every year in Canada through Canadian Physicians for Life. They draw together medical students from across the country and form them in solid ethics and provide it to them and work with them in the years to come. And many of them are now doctors practicing as pro-life physicians.
Thanks be to God. All right, let's go to San Antonio, Texas now, listening on Guadalupe Radio. We welcome Mike to the broadcast. Mike, you're on Catholic Answers Live with Stephanie Gray.
Yes, hello. I just caught the program, and I heard some discussion about pro-life families having the children, and that should bode well for the future. My point is that the pro-abortion people don't care who's having the children. What they care about is who controls the schools. And let me give an example. I was some years back. I was sitting in a college philosophy class. The instructor turned out I had an instructor that was Hispanic, which I thought might be a little more pro-life, pro-family. Well, one day I overheard this instructor encouraging another student to read Singer, from Princeton, and everybody knows who Singer is. So that's I guess my question is, I don't know. Is there an answer for this? I don't know.
Answer to what, Mike? How would this sound
an
as a
answer to
question?
Who controls? It's the pro. The secular ethicists control the school system.
Sorry, Mike. Are you asking about the public school system or the Catholic school system?
Probably both.
Well, I think they're different answers because the source of authority is different. But Stephanie,
yes, certainly. I mean, you raise a valid point that gatekeepers can be helpful or harming, or they can help or harm. And in this case, where the truth and goodness is not being taught, then we need to try to influence gatekeepers to open the gate so that we can teach truth. And if they're not doing that, that's where we do, as I was saying, we stand outside of public high schools 5 days a week, and we don't need to be on the inside because we're on the outside getting the message out. So we need to be creative about how to reach people we can't reach through traditional channels. But where we can reach through traditional channels, we absolutely have to do that, which is why I routinely do assemblies in, for example, Catholic high schools or evangelical high schools. I think it's important for us to remember, who do we know in our circles? Because if we know people who are superintendents or principals or pastors or teachers, social workers, physicians, nurses, pharmacists, we have to ask ourselves, am I influencing those people in my life? Because they then influence a whole bunch of other people. How many of us are 1 to 2 steps away from these people of power and authority? And if we only influence them positively, then they would influence the people below them positively. So we need to rise to the occasion.
Isn't it true it's macro and micro? You can't, not every pro-life activist can do much about the curriculum in a school board, but not every school board administrator can do much about what's happening in the neighborhood at the so-called clinic.
Right.
Both end, right?
Yes.
1-888-31-TRUTH. That's the number to reach Stephanie Gray on this pro-life Q&A open forum. Let's go to Greg now in Dallas, Texas on KATH Radio. Hello, Greg. You're on the air.
Hi. Stephanie, my question relates to miscarriages. And I was engaging in conversation with a pro-choice advocate, and he brought up the startling point that Catholics often don't treat miscarriages as deaths. We don't hold funerals for babies who are miscarried. And he was asking me, if we believe that life begins at conception, why don't Catholics do more, to research why miscarriages happen or to hold services for babies who are miscarried?
Right. And I think it's a valid question. What we want to point out is that all he may be identifying is inconsistency within the view. But the fact that someone isn't perhaps memorializing someone who dies naturally at a certain age doesn't mean it's okay for us to kill that individual purposefully, which is what abortion does. But moreover, I would say he's making a very broad statement that people don't, for example, hold funerals. When a dear friend of mine was miscarrying very early in pregnancy, she consulted me for what she should do. And I gave her the counsel that if I were in her situation, that I would collect all the blood and I would bury the blood and hold a private funeral.
With a name.
With a name, absolutely, and they did name the child.
Beautiful.
And I absolutely would do that, and that is what they did.
Greg in Dallas, thanks for the call. This is Catholic Answers Live, trying to get to as many folks as we can in the closing moments of the broadcast, including Joanna in California on Immaculate Heart Radio. Joanna, welcome to the show. You're on the air.
Hi, yes. My question actually has to do with the morning after pill. I'm a registered nurse in the emergency room, and I was approached to become a sexual assault nurse. And I work for Dignity Health, which is actually used to be Catholic Healthcare West. And so I asked one of the nurses, and to all women that were sexually assaulted, they offer the morning after pill. And so I know that I can't take that position and willingly give that. And so my question is how can a Catholic-based hospital have a policy to provide the morning after pill?
I'm not sure how often you've heard the show, Joanna. This is a question that comes up from time to time when Father Tat Pacholczyk is on the air. He's the National Director of Education for the NCB Center, the National Catholic Bioethics Center, that Stephanie referenced earlier. It turns out it's not a black and white, magisterially defined issue. One can imagine a situation where the use of the morning after pill might be illicit as long as certain conditions are more than reasonably certain that it has to do with whether or not the woman is ovulating. But that's not something that the church has officially weighed in on yet, and I understand that that's shifting ground. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The ability to determine ovulation or not is also in state of flux.
Right, and the key in these situations when you're dealing with victims of sexual assault is determining whether administering the morning after pill would be contraceptive or abortifacient. Because if it will not kill the preborn child, because this was an act of non-consensual sex, an act of violence done on her against her will, it is not unitive or procreative, and she actually has a right to defend her body against the rapist's sperm from impregnating her by fertilizing her egg. So if it could suppress ovulation, then it seems that it could be acceptable. But if she has already ovulated and fertilization may have happened, and administering the morning after pill, depending on where she is in her cycle, could act to suppress or prevent implantation, then it would have an abortifacient effect and it wouldn't be ethical. So I would, again, point you to the National Catholic Bioethics Center. The website is ncbcenter.org. I can't say enough good things about them. They're phenomenal. And I like to say that all great minds and great Canadians think alike, because when Patrick mentioned Father Tad, that's exactly who was going through my mind. I took a course through him. So Father Tad Pacholczyk is brilliant, and ncbcenter.org will be able to give you more guidance in this very important job you've been offered. There are 4 criteria, okay, Joanna. You might want to pay attention to it. Father Tad has a specific essay called Getting It Right the Morning After. You can find that at ncbcenter.org. Thanks for the call, Joanna. We appreciate it. Thanks for your work.
Okay, thank you.
All right, from Joanna in California to Veronica in Texas on Catholic.com. Veronica, the true image. Welcome aboard.
Hi, well, wonderful. Okay, I'll just get straight to my question.
Thank you.
I was watching, I think, a documentary or a show or something 3 years ago. I don't remember exactly. My kids were yelling in the background, so I didn't get to see the whole thing. But I do remember this one part that kind of stuck with me. And I think it might have been on, like, population control or something.
Yep.
That a country in Eastern Europe, I think it might have been Romania, where abortion was, like, completely outdone with, and they basically had an overflow of all these unwanted children. And when they got of age or something, they, they were basically, not raised with everything that they needed. So they had a high criminal activities going on in that country, and they give it back to that because of that reason.
Veronica, I think Stephanie knows where that spear is landing. Why not abort kids from high-risk backgrounds? Because then 18 years in the future, we'll have fewer crimes.
Exactly. If the preborn are as human as the born, then we would have to say, would we ever have the standard for born children? And if they, if there's a higher likelihood that a certain group of 5-year-olds will become criminals when they're 18, do we kill them when they're 5? Mm-hmm. If the answer is no, then we may not kill the preborn, because there may be a higher incidence that they may be criminals when they're older. This sounds like Romania, as you think your recollection is. I believe you're correct. It was under the Ceausescu regime. The problem was that he was a major human rights violator. His people didn't even have food. Times where they didn't have electricity, they were extremely poor. So the problem wasn't access to abortion, but that a really bad dictator was in power.
Thanks for the call, Saul, and the other callers. I'm sorry we didn't get to you. I'm not sorry you got here in beautiful Southern California. Thanks for joining us, Stephanie Gray.
It's so fun to be live in studio.
Always
just
a pleasure.
Saying.
Preach it, oh fellow Canadian you. All right, 1-888-31-TRUTH. Call that number 22 hours from now. We have a Q&A open forum for everyone tomorrow, starting with Tim Staples in the first hour, Jim Blackburn in the second hour. Father Tad Pacholczyk will be here through the magic of the telephone on Wednesday. Bioethics for the rest of us, followed by the one and only Scott Hahn on his new book, Consuming the Word. This is Catholic Answers Live. I'm Patrick Coffin. Be a saint. What else is there?